The independent police investigation into child sex abuse in Rotherham has found at least 100 more potential victims. The National Crime Agency began the huge investigation following a report by Professor Alexis Jay in 2014, which identified an estimated 1,400 children who'd been abused between 1997 and 2013. Today, the NCA revealed the number is more than 1,500, including around 200 men who were boys at the time. Many were taken to different towns and cities, and one was trafficked to Pakistan. Jane Death reports from Rotherham.
It was in 2014 that an independent report revealed 1,400 children could have been abused in Rotherham. Over 16 years, they were raped by gangs of men, beaten, some doused with petrol. The report said the police and council effectively ignored what was going on.
Our collective objective is to identify and bring to justice offenders for this past abuse.
Paul Williamson of the National Crime Agency has to undo the damage done by the authorities here. The Rotherham investigation is now working on 19,000 lines of inquiry. The number of potential victims has risen to more than 1,500. So far, 260 are engaging with police. Out of more than 100 suspected offenders, 4 have been convicted so far. When Elizabeth, not her real name, was being abused at 15, South Yorkshire Police didn't want to know. She took a risk putting her trust in this investigation. She stood up in court and has seen a conviction.
That was my time for people to know what really went off and for me to be believed. It's not about the amount of years that they get sentenced. It's about that guilty conviction, knowing that someone's actually believed you. Because I think that's, apart from the abuse, that's another thing that I've always struggled with, knowing that they didn't want to believe.
Today there are 144 officers working on 34 different investigations.
The more police investigate, the bigger the Rotherham scandal becomes. This was organised crime by more than 100 suspects, moving children around towns in the north. And in one case, a girl from here was trafficked all the way to Pakistan to be abused.
I think it's a real concern. I mean, we see the prevalence of trafficking due to the increased focus of law enforcement on modern slavery and human trafficking over recent years. There is a market for trafficking of victims, both into the UK and also that illegally apply outside of the UK.
Jane Senior blew the whistle in Rotherham and now works with victims and their families. She says the current investigation has been sensitive and patient, but she thinks even 1,500 victims isn't the true number.
Over the period that they're covering, maybe 1,800. We'll never know the true figure because we don't know, like I say, how many have not come forward. And when we had the first trial in Rotherham, out of all the victims that gave evidence, I didn't know 4 of them.
18 men will stand trial this year. There are many more police would like to see in court, but not all of their victims will want or be able to relive the horrors of the past.
Well, I'm joined now by the Labour MP for Rotherham, Sarah Champion, who's campaigned on behalf of the victims of child sex abuse. The scale is really quite staggering, isn't it?
It's staggering, but personally I think it's still going to be the tip of the iceberg.
Really?
I say that for 2 reasons. One, the National Crime Agency is only looking at cases between 1997 and 2013. So I've got evidence of it going back to the early 60s, and of course it is still going on now. We're seeing that through the prosecutions. But also, I think when you look at, for example, rape victims that come forward, it's about 15% of victims that come forward and make the allegations. So if we look at a similar model for child sexual exploitation, where, to be quite honest, these are children who have been manipulated for years to not realise the scale of the abuse, or indeed that it is abuse, I think 1,500 is still going to be a small figure.
Have you got any sense of where it's going to end up?
I was trying to work out today if it's a good story or a bad story that we're at 1,500. Every new case is an individual whose life potentially has been destroyed. Every person needs support to rebuild their life. I'm glad that we're recognising the scale of it. I'm glad that the NCA are doing an amazing job about getting these convictions, but there's still an awful lot more, and I genuinely don't know when it's going to stop, and it's an awful thing to say that.
And you say with confidence that it is still going on.
Yes.
At what kind of levels, what kind of scale do you think still?
Well, again, that's the problem. I mean, what I would love to say, I think what happened between, 97 and 13 was sort of the tip
Extraordinary.
of it, and was extraordinary and was unique, but I don't see how it can be. I mean, not least because this has been going on for decades and decades, and we need those people to have the confidence to come forward so we can try and stop it.
Did it surprise you that there were boys amongst the victims identified by the police?
I hadn't met any of them, so from that level it surprised me. But what we're talking about are the lowest form of humanity who prey, who manipulate, who abuse, who exploit. So whilst the majority of victims that I know are white girls, I also know them within the Pakistani community. I also know them people that have learning difficulties, physical difficulties. So it's not a surprise that they would prey on boys as well.
And we're sadly used to hearing about women from many African countries being trafficked across Europe. But to hear that potentially a girl from Rotherham has been trafficked to Pakistan, I mean, that turns on its head what we understand by trafficking, doesn't it?
I think people need to understand that child abuse has become a global phenomena, particularly because of the use of the internet. I mean, we saw the massive conviction yesterday, and I think people need to understand that abusers find other abusers, that there are ways that they can exploit particularly children internationally, and so trafficking them, well, to be honest, come to London, go to a brothel and see how many of those people have come internationally. So the fact it goes in all directions shouldn't surprise people.
You wrote controversially in The Sun last year that, quote, Britain has a problem with British Pakistani men raping and exploiting white girls. You said afterwards that you'd chosen your words poorly. But do you think that political correctness is still hampering the fight against this kind of child grooming?
Well, the reaction that I got shows that people are very nervous talking about this. The Sun kindly wrote the headline for me. What I think we should have done right at the very beginning, and what we should be doing going forward, is look at criminals as criminals. And we then need to look at what the common denominators are. So, for example, when they're coming from the Catholic Church, when they're coming from the BBC.
And are we still not doing that?
I think we are, but I think there is still nervousness when it comes down to race that's the common denominator. And that does a disservice to everybody, particularly the Pakistani community.
Sarah Champion, thank you very much for joining us.